Hello and welcome to this lesson. Now we're going to learn about the different ways to target specific elements on a web page, and then we'll go over how to change attribute value pairs. So you might be wondering, what's an attribute value pair? Well, this is an attribute value pair right here. The ID equals to this particular value. So this is the attribute and this is the value. This h1 tag has an attribute called ID, right? And the value is title. Right, same thing goes for this. This is a class attribute and the value is this. So using jQuery we can actually change the attribute value pairs of elements on a web page. Okay, so we're first going to learn about the selection. There are a couple of ways you can select multiple elements on a page, and then we're going to go into how to change the attribute values for certain elements. So this is actually the jQuery tutorial number 9 project, so make sure you have that open, and the web page you can load up is right here. It's a simple web page with the title, a little picture here, and basically just a list, and this is an instruction list on how to change a tire. So let's go over how to select multiple elements on the web page. In the JS folder we have a jQuery custom code file. This is where we're going to be typing all of the jQuery. So let's say we wanted to change the color of certain elements. Let's say we want to make them green. We want to turn this paragraph to green. We want to, for example, this h3 tag, we want the data in here to be green, as well as this div. So how could we do this? Well, in the CSS selector we need to target each one of those elements. So we could do p.instruct underscore title. Okay, and this element is right here. It has a class instruct title for the p tag. Okay, and then the next thing we want is this. For example, there's another thing I want to turn green. So we could do p.instruct title, comma, and then we go to the next thing we want to select, and that's going to be the div with the ID called closing underscore statement. And then finally we have an h3 tag that we want to also turn green. So these are the multiple elements that we are selecting, and we are separating them with a comma, and we put all of this into one single set of quotations. Okay, and then we do the .css method that you've already seen. We give the color attribute and we give the value green. Okay, and now let's refresh the page and it should be working. Notice that this, as well as this down here is colored green. So we briefly covered several lessons ago that we can select multiple elements. But there is another way that I want you to be familiar with to select multiple elements. And that is if I target p.instruct underscore title, and then I do a .add, and then I give the next element that I want to select, and then finally .add again for this h3 tag. So instead of all of these elements in one CSS selector, we can split that up into multiple. So this one targets this, .add, we're also selecting this, and we're also selecting this. So keep this .add method in mind. It's actually faster for the computer to process your code using this approach as compared with this. Okay, this is actually it's more convenient for the programmer but slower for the computer process. The rest of it is going to be exactly the same. We could do .css and then give the color green. So let me comment out the first line. Let's refresh the page here and notice it's working as expected. So some lessons ago we covered how to use the add class method to add a class attribute to an element on a web page. And that was of course done using jQuery. We're using the add class jQuery method. And you can add multiple classes to elements by separating them with a space, such as in this example. But how would you add an ID to an element? Well, if you know your CSS, you'll recall that an element can only have a single ID attribute. Okay, it can have multiple classes, of course, but only a single ID can be assigned to a particular element. So that's the reason why there is no add ID method in jQuery. But don't despair. you can still give an ID or replace ID for an element using jQuery, and that is done using the attribute method, ATTR, the attr method, okay, however you want to pronounce it. The attr method assigns an attribute value pair to an element, such as the source of an image. For example, this is an attribute value pair right here. The source attribute and the value is here. This is considered an attribute value pair. So for any element, you can change the attribute value pair using the ATTR method. So let's go over how we can do this. So we have a few list elements down here, and some of them happen to be important. As you can see that they're given the class attribute with the value important. Okay, I want these important instructions to be large. Okay, we can just increase their font size to be something large. And I actually have a style sheet here, and in here we have a class, the ID big, and that just basically multiplies the font size by 2 and makes it bold. So if I wanted to apply this ID to these particular elements, we could do that using jQuery and the ATTR method. So let me demonstrate how we can use the ATTR method here. So let's first target what we are looking for. We want to target the li tags with the important class, and then we could just do on, and then let's say that if I hover my mouse over one of these, right? If I hover my mouse over one of these list items, I want that to be made large. So there's a special event for that, and that's called mouse over. The next thing is function, and inside of here we're going to use the attribute method to give an ID to all of the lists that are important. We need the this keyword here to target the specific list that the user is interacting with, because the user could be on any one of these list elements, and the one that they are hovering their mouse on, that's the one I want to make large. So we could do this dot attr, and then we give the ID attribute to be big. Okay, in the style.css, this is the ID big, and it's going to make it bold, and it's going to increase the size. So we're going to increase the size of the list elements that are important by assigning their ID to be big. Okay, so now let's go back here, refresh the page, and now if I hover my mouse over one of the important list elements, for example this one was important, it increased the size. Okay, going down, we have another one down here. There you go, raise vehicle by cranking jack, that's another important list element. And then down here, tightening the bolts. Okay, so on the mouse over event, we assigned the attribute value, the ID attribute with the value big. Now let's say if I wanted to bring the size back to what it was before. As soon as I hover my mouse on it, it should get large, and then when I remove my mouse, it should go back to the way it was. So basically toggling it back. How would you do that using the ATTR method? Well, that's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. All we have to do is target the element that we're interacting with using the this keyword, and then we could do on. There's another method just like mouse over, we have a mouse leave event. So when the user takes off their mouse from the element, we want to register that event. And when that happens, we could do this dot attr, and then we give the ID to be small. Okay, and this is another ID we have in the styles .css. That's this guy right here. So it's going to basically bring the size back to 1 EM the way it was. So let's refresh the page now, and now let's hover our mouse over. Notice that it's increased now. If I take my mouse off, notice it goes back to the way it was. Okay, let's go down here. Notice that this one is also behaving exactly as expected. Okay, now let's say that this title, instructions for changing the tire, let's say I want to apply 2 classes to this. Well, I could use the add class method that you've seen, or I could just refer to the particular attribute using the ATTR method. So let's target that element first, and that's the h1 with the ID title. Okay, that's going to be this thing right here, and we could see that in the index.html This is the guy that we're talking about. So let's say that I want to make this pretty. Well, we have a class here called pretty, and this is not going to make it look very pretty, but it just sort of turns it pink and italicizes it. And then we also want to apply the dot border. We want to surround a border around that title. So all we have to do is we could do on, if the user clicks on that title, we want to give the pretty as well as the border class to that particular title. And we can do that using the attr method. So that's going to be using the this keyword, of course. So when the user clicks on the particular title, we want to assign the class attribute, the pretty class, as well as the border. So we're giving, in this situation, we're giving multiple classes. As you've seen in the add class method, this approach works exactly the same way. We refer to the particular attribute and we're giving it multiple classes, and we just separate them with a space. So let's end that with a semicolon, and now let's refresh the page. If I click on this title, notice that it makes it look not very pretty, but it does apply the styles. So right now I think is a good time for an assignment. Your assignment is to increase the size of this image. When the user clicks on this image, I want the size to be doubled. Okay? When the user clicks on this image, I want the size of this image to be doubled, and I want you to use the attr method to do so. So pause the video now, try this out on your own, and then you can resume to watch my solution. Alright, welcome back. Hopefully you took the time to complete that assignment. Anytime I ask you to pause the video and try something out, make sure you take the time to complete it, as well as some of the homework assignments. I really hope you're practicing and doing all of the homework, because that's going to make all the difference. By the time you're done with this course, if you've been completing all the assignments, you should be pretty confident. So the assignment was, I wanted you to double the size of the image of this person changing the tire. This image, when I click it, I want it to double, and that's this guy right here, this image tag, and the width as well as the height would need to be doubled. So instead of 20%, you could just change this to 40%, and I want you to use the attr attribute method to basically double the width as well as the height of this image. So the way to do that is first target this image, and that's just going to be img, and then the ID for the image is the_img. And then on the click event, when a user clicks on it, we want the following to happen. We want the size of the image, which is this image, we want its attribute of width to be changed to, instead of 20, we want it to be 40%. Okay? And we need to do the same thing with the length. So again, we can use this dot attr, and then we give the length length to be 40%, and this should double the size of the image. Okay, save this file. Let's refresh the page here to make sure we're loading, and then click the image, and boom, notice that it's working as expected. Okay, now just a quick note, there's a shortcut. Instead of using this twice, we could just chain these methods. Let me show you. Let me get rid of that and then chain the second attribute call with the first one. Okay, so to this image we are changing its width attribute as well as its length attribute, and we could chain these methods together. We did that up here with the .add, and then the .cs. So the method call that follows applies to the one that was before it, and that applies to the one that was before it. Okay, so the objective of this assignment was for you to get familiar with using the attr method, as well as seeing that you can call this twice, or chain it together. And of course, not just IDs and classes could be the attributes. You can change any old attribute on this web page. Now another way you can change attributes is over here we're doing the .attr twice. Well, we can actually pass in a map. As you saw with the .css method, remember we were passing in a list of key values. So you can pass in a list of key values to one of these attr methods. So let's copy this guy right here, and I'm just going to put that inside of the first attribute. call. So that's going to be surrounded by these curly braces that you saw when we were learning about the CSS method, and separate it with a comma and put in the other attribute value. And then the important thing is we need to put a colon to separate the different attribute values. All right, so this attribute is going to be given this value, and this attribute is going to be given this value, and so you separate the two attribute values with a comma. Okay, so this is the first attribute value, this is the second attribute value. Make sure that you put a colon here, just like you did with the CSS method, and this should work as expected. So let's refresh the page, make sure we have the latest code, and then click on the image and notice that it's working as expected. Okay, so a couple of different ways to apply a lot of these methods. Another method related to attributes is remove attr. And that does exactly what it sounds like. We can remove an attribute belonging to a particular element. So let's actually try to remove this image. I'm going to copy this and paste it down here. And instead of click, let's say if the user double clicks the image, when the user double clicks the image, we want the image to basically disappear or something. So a quick way to do that is we could do this dot remove attr, remove the src, the source. So what is the source? Well, the source points to the location of where this image resides, okay? And that's in this img folder right here. So I'm basically removing the source attribute from this particular image, and so the image will disappear when I double click on the image. So let's refresh the page to make sure we have the latest code. If I click it once, it of course doubles it, but when I double click it, boom, notice that the image, the source attribute has been removed, and hence the image is no longer shown here. Now you might be wondering, what is this crunched up looking box? That's actually the image tag, because we haven't actually removed the image element from the web page. We just basically changed the source or removed the source, but the image tag is still on the web page. So if we wanted to remove the image completely, then we would have to remove the image tag. So in that case, instead of the remove attr, we can actually do the dot remove and get rid of the actual parameter. So now let's refresh the page. If I click it once, it increases the size, and if I double click it, notice that that line is no longer there. It completely removed this element, which was that image. Alright, so this lesson is already getting pretty long. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about how we can select multiple elements on the web page by separating inside of the selector, separating the different elements using a comma, or you can use the dot add method and tag on the additional elements that we are interested in targeting. And we also talked about the attr attribute method and how you can change or give attributes to different elements on the web page. Elements can only have a single ID assigned to them. So when you give a particular ID, it basically replaces the old one, as well as the class. Okay, that's an important thing to keep in mind, that when you use the attr method, you're not adding on a class. You're actually literally changing the attribute value of the class attribute. Okay, so if there was a class attribute that had multiple classes assigned to it, if you use the .attr method and you give a new class, well, all of those old classes on the markup on the web page are going to be gone, because you're using the .attr method to change the value of the class attribute. Okay, so keep that in mind. And you also learn about how you can pass in a map, a list of key values to the attribute method. You learn about the remove attr as well as the remove method, which completely removes the element off the web page. So there's a lot to chew on in this lesson, so if you need to review some of this stuff again, feel free to do so. Make sure to complete the assignment that follows to get the required practice, and thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Hey there, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the document ready function. And after that, we're going to dive deeper into the topic of searching for specific elements and targeting them based on other criteria Right? You've already seen how to target specific elements by referring to their class or referring to their ID and the tag. Well, there's a lot of other ways you can do this. For example, if I asked you to target the third list item in this unordered list, how would you do that? Well, jQuery has a robust set of tools you can use to specifically target these elements. And this comes from CSS, the CSS selectors. CSS has a vast tool set to target specific elements, and jQuery supports all of that. We're going to first go over what a document ready function is, and then after that we're going to move on to selectors. So let's get started. This is jQuery tutorial 10. Make sure you have the right project open, and actually we're going to start this off with the same exact code base that I left you with in the previous lesson. So let's navigate over to our folder and open the index page. And notice that this is in fact the same exact page. It's supporting all the functionality. If you click on the title, it makes it all this. It makes it pretty. If you click on the picture, it doubles it. Now, so far in the course, as you've been seeing, our jQuery code is all the way at the bottom of the web page. Right? The link to the jQuery file, our custom jQuery file, is always to the bottom, to the end of the body tag. And that's because we want the entire DOM to be loaded, all of the elements on the web page to be available before our jQuery code kicks off. Your jQuery code is dependent on all of these elements. You're working with, you're targeting specific elements and you're doing stuff with them. You want to make sure that they're loaded in the DOM before your jQuery code kicks in. But some developers have become used to adding these files to the top, okay, to the top of this page. So if I take this jQuery code and I put it on the top of the document, and if I navigate back to the web page, let's refresh it. Notice that the green and the highlighting and all of that, click on the title, nothing is working. This shows that jQuery is not loading, right? And the reason for that is because before all of this was loaded in the DOM, jQuery had already finished running, okay, because we are loading the script up here. So to combat that, some developers still do this, and this is actually bad practice. You want to put this on the bottom of the page, but some developers still do this. So to combat that, there is something called a document ready function that you should get accustomed to. So the idea behind that is to wrap all of this jQuery code into something called the document ready function. And what that's going to do is make sure that the DOM, all of the elements on the web page, are loaded before any of this jQuery code runs. Let me show you what that code looks like. That's actually something you can memorize, or you could, get used to seeing it. You basically are targeting the particular document, and then you call the ready function on it, and then you pass in the function, and that's it. Okay. Anything that goes in here is going to run after the document has been loaded completely. Okay, so all of this code is not in this function call. So of course this is not going to wait. It's not going to wait for the document to load before running. So to make sure that all of this code runs after the document is loaded, we're going to just take all of this, cut it, and just paste it inside of that function. Now in this course we're using jQuery version 3. And depending on what time you're watching this course, it may have moved on to jQuery 4, but you can tell that we're using jQuery 3 because the library that we have downloaded is right here, jQuery version 3. So in version 3, they have upgraded some of the functionality, and now you don't need to use this entire thing, referencing the document and then .ready. All you need is just a function. So you need the $, and then the function. This is actually, it was an anonymous function. Not important to go over the details of that. If you want to know what an anonymous function is, you can dig deeper into JavaScript. But since this is a jQuery course, I sort of already expect you to know what that is. But don't worry if you don't know what that is. Most of the stuff that you learn in this course, you're not going to need to know the difference between an anonymous function and some other kind of function. Okay, so this is all we need for the document to be ready, and as long as our code is inside of this function, we can be sure that the document has been loaded completely before any of this jQuery runs. Okay, so now if we load the page and let's refresh it, notice that it's still not working. Okay, the title is not changing the color. If I double click the picture, it doesn't go away, and you know the jQuery is actually not working. So let's go back and debug this real quick. Let's look at the index.html. I have a feeling I know what I did. Aha! Notice that we moved the jQuery custom code script to the top. Even though we did that, because of this function, it should still work. This document ready function makes sure that the DOM is loaded completely before any of this code runs. So why is it still not working? Well, guess what? What we've coded in this file, in the jQuery custom code, we've coded jQuery code, right? How will the browser know that this is jQuery code? The library, the jQuery library, is being loaded down here, okay? So we need to make sure that this library is loaded first before any of our jQuery code, because the thing that makes sure that the DOM is loaded first is in fact jQuery code. This is jQuery. So we want to make sure that the jQuery library is loaded first before our custom jQuery code. And now if we refresh the page, it should be working as expected. Notice the title is now green and some of this stuff is being bolded. Okay, the picture enlarges, the title gets formatted. But regardless, the best standard is to keep these files on the bottom of the web page, closer to the closing body tag. Okay, that's the industry standard, but in the industry you'll still see some people putting this on the top, and that's not the recommended way. And just in case someone does put those script files to the top, we're going to make sure that we have this document ready function, and inside of it is where all of our jQuery code is going to reside. And I'm going to be using this standard throughout the remainder of the course. All right, now that we have the document ready function out of the way, it's time to move on to the selectors. In the previous lesson, you saw that you can have multiple selectors like this and separated with a comma. And you can also add the different selectors. Well, there's so much more you can do with selecting and targeting specific elements in jQuery, and you have CSS to thank, because CSS has a robust set of tools to target specific elements, and jQuery supports all of that functionality that CSS provides. So let's say, for example, I wanted you to target these LIs and I wanted you to make them the color blue. How would you do that? Well, you could probably just put, let me just comment out all of this code. Well, let's just get rid of it. We don't need that. You could probably just target the LIs directly by doing something like this and just say, you know, CSS, and just give the color to be blue. And this will work in our current situation. If I refresh the page, notice that these LIs are blue. But let's say that we have another set of LIs. For example, after this closing statement, let's say we have another unordered list. I'll give it the ID, we'll call it save_tools. And this is going to contain a list of instructions or whatever. So I could just put li save the jack in the storage compartment, and that finishes that list item. And then I can have another list item, save the flat tire in the trunk. Now if we refresh the page, notice that all of the LIs are being targeted with that selector. With this selector that we picked, we're targeting all of the LIs. So you might think that, you know, you can narrow in on them by referring to the ID. You can do UL ID steps. That should work, but there is a better way to do this. Instead of li here, I could just do pound steps and then put a space li, just like you would in CSS. When we're referring to children of a parent, we put a space. So inside of the steps, inside of the element that has the ID steps, we have LIs, and that's what we are targeting. So now only those LIs that belong to steps are going to be highlighted. So let's refresh the page here and notice that only these are blue and these are no longer blue. Okay. Now there are other things we could do here. Let's say inside of this list we have another unsorted list. Let me just copy this code here. So inside of this list of steps, this unordered list, we have another unordered list, okay, with further breakdown of the steps. And I'll just give this the ID, for example. Well, let's just call it nested underscore steps. And over here, since this is related to the cranking of the jack, we could just say make sure the jack is sturdy, and if you get tired, take a break. Doesn't matter what you write here, this is just an example. I don't want you to go ahead and take these as the go-to commandments to change your tire. Please do not do that, okay? So this is the nested list. So now let's refresh the page, and now notice that all of the list elements in the unordered list steps are being turned to blue. But let's say I only want the children, for example, these guys and these guys, not the grandchildren. Okay, these are the grandchildren. These list items and these list items, the direct children of this steps unordered list. Well, for that, you can use something called direct descendants. And there's a syntax for that. You just put a greater than sign. And this just ensures that only the direct descendants, the immediate children of the element with the ID steps, are the ones that are targeted. Okay? And we are going to change their color to blue. So now let's refresh the page here and notice that only the direct children are being turned to blue. The grandchildren here are not. Now, by the way, you can use the Chrome Dev Tools to inspect the page. Okay, this is the first time we're going through in this course, but I sort of already expect you to know how to inspect elements, since the prerequisite for this course was, HTML and CSS and a little bit of JavaScript. But don't worry if you're a little shaky on it. We're just going to right-click on this page and go to Inspect anywhere on this page. And this allows us to be able to target the specific elements using this UI tool on the right. You just hover your mouse here and notice that it's selecting the particular elements. So the direct children of this element right here, steps, are all of these list items, right? And notice that their color has been changed to blue. There's a style attribute, and it has been added with the color blue, okay? And then the nested steps here, if you expand this, these guys do not have the color blue added to them, okay? So you can always inspect your page and drill down into things when you're debugging. It's a very, very useful tool. So let's go back to our code. Now, what if I asked you to select the first element in the unordered list? Let's say I wanted you to select this particular list item. Well, you could do that using something called a filter, okay? And this is also supported in CSS. And a filter basically works like this. Let's first target the ID steps, and then we can target the specific li that we want, and then we just do first, just like that. And this is going to target the first li in the steps unordered list. And then we could just do, just to color it something else, we'll just say color red. And let's refresh the page here and notice that this first child has been colored red. So let's take a look at the steps element and the first child right here. Notice that its color has been changed to red. So this is another important syntax to keep in mind. You use this something called a filter. Just like first, we have something called last. Let's refresh the page here and notice that the last child is going to be targeted. Now let's say that I wanted you to target the first list item in the unordered list called steps, and the first list element inside of this nested steps unordered list. So these guys right here, let's expand this. I wanted you to target this guy as well as this guy right here. How would you do that? I'll leave this to you as an assignment. So pause the video and try that out on your own. So back in the HTML, target this element and then this element right here, the first child of the unordered list for both steps as well as nested steps. Alright, welcome back. Hopefully you took a shot at that. Hopefully it wasn't too hard. Let me comment out this line for now. I'm just going to copy it, borrow the code, and put it down here. So we're going to change this to first. So we could do steps li colon first, and then put a comma, and then we target the nested steps ID. So it's going to be nested underscore steps, and then put a space, colon first. So this is the first target, and this is the second target, and we separate it with a comma. And we're going to color that red in this example. So let's go back here, let's refresh the page, and notice that, boom, the first child of the steps unordered list is being targeted, and the first child of the nested steps unordered list is being targeted, which is right here. You expand that. Make sure you are expanding these arrows to narrow in on the elements. Now there are a lot of other things you could do. You may want to select a child based on their position. Let's say I wanted you to target the third list item in the steps unordered list. So I wanted you to target this guy right here in this unordered list steps. How would you do that? Well, there's something called the nth child filter. And the way that works is, let's first target the particular unordered list, and that's going to be steps. Then we'll put a space, and then you do li colon nth dash child. And then we give the index position for where that child is. We want the third child, and then we can let's just put a border around it. We could just do border colon, and I'm just going to make it a 1 pixel border, solid with the color red. Okay, this is the CSS stuff that you looked at in the previous lesson. Just a quick refresher here. So let's go back to the web page and refresh it, and notice that we're targeting the third child of the unordered list steps. And as the presentation here is changing, you can look at the markup and browse around and see how your web page is changing. Notice that it added to the style attribute of this li, it added the color blue as well as the border with the proper settings. jQuery provides all of the functionality that CSS typically does for selecting elements on a web page. So there's so much more you can do with CSS selectors. For example, you can select elements based on the attributes that they possess. So if I wanted to, for example, target all of the paragraphs that have the class attribute. So for example, this paragraph right here has a class called instruct title. So I could target this particular paragraph based on whether it has the class attribute. Okay, and it will only target this one and not the other paragraphs. I think this is the only paragraph on the page that has a class attribute, and looks to be right. So let's target this particular paragraph using the CSS selector. So we first target the paragraph, and then inside of these brackets we put in the attribute that we want to make sure this paragraph contains. So this is going to target all of the paragraphs on the web page that have a class attribute. Okay, and then we could just, for example, let's just give this a border like we're doing up here. I'm just going to copy this code and paste it inside of this CSS. Okay, and just so that we don't have too many borders on the page, let me just comment out the previous line. So it's going to target the one and only paragraph that we have on the page with the class attribute. Okay, now we have a couple of different paragraphs here. For example, this one, and I think there's another one down here. For example, this one, but this guy is the one, is the only one that has an attribute of class. So let's take a look at the web page now. Let's refresh, and notice it's targeting the paragraph with the class attribute. So this is just basically doing a contains. It's saying, give me all of the paragraphs that contain the attribute class. But you can also target based on the value a particular attribute contains. Okay, so for example, we have a UL that has the ID steps. So instead of just giving ID, I can further narrow in on the ID that is named steps. Okay, so we're targeting all the ULs on the page that have the ID steps, and we can, for example, let's just hide it. Okay, so let's go back. It's going to hide all of these list items. Let's refresh the page, and boom, notice that they're gone. Okay, because I'm using this hide function. Now another thing I just want to show you is here in the HTML, you'll notice that the steps, the HTML is still here. notice that the style has been display none. Okay, so that's essentially what hide does. It basically hides it from you by changing the style to display none. Okay, so we're targeting based on an attribute having a certain value. Here we're just targeting based on whether the particular tag contains a given attribute. I want to show you a resource that you can use to learn more about these selectors and have them as a reference. You can head on over to w3schools.com/jquery/ref_selectors.asp. And this link will take you directly to a chart where you have all of the selectors that we've spoken about plus much more. And it gives an example for each one so you can test it out in your browser. And this is important. Practice a lot of this stuff, not just what I covered, but just look at the different variations, get some ideas on how to use this stuff. You don't have to know all of the different syntax that's available to you, but it's good to know that it's there. We're going to be covering the most important of these throughout this course. So this is the selector section. Over to the left we have jQuery events. So click here. This is another great reference. This has all of the events that you can use in your jQuery code, some of which we've covered and we will continue to cover in this course. And then jQuery effects. This is, hiding and animating, fading in, fading out. You saw some of this stuff. So this is a great place to find out what a particular method does. If you click on one of these methods, it gives you an example. So definitely add this website to your toolbox. It's a great resource to have. Now we're not done with selectors yet. There's a lot more functionality that you need to learn about, and we're going to continue on this topic of selectors in the next lesson. So let's wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Hi there. In the previous lesson we covered various ways to target specific elements on our web page using CSS selectors. In this lesson we're going to expand upon that syntax further and see some of the other ways in which we could target the things we want on a web page. Now you saw in the previous lesson that you could target all the descendants of a particular element by putting a space after the parent. So in this example, this is a div tag with the class smart. All of the paragraphs that are inside of that div are going to be targeted. So these could be, children or great-grandchildren or, children of children of children, all the way nesting in. Wherever it finds a paragraph, that's what this is going to target. And this is known as the descendant selector. Now in this example, we have the greater than sign separating the div and the paragraph. This means we want only the direct descendants, basically the immediate children paragraphs of the particular div. So it's not going to target the grandchildren or great-grandchildren or anything like that. This is a direct descendant selector, immediate children paragraphs of the particular div. Well, expanding upon this, there are some other symbols that you'll need to learn about. Take a look at this example. This little squiggly line between the div and the paragraph basically represents siblings. So in this example, we want to target all of the siblings of div that are paragraphs. So we're targeting all of the paragraph siblings of the divs. That's exactly what this means. So that's not a parent or child, but more like a brother and sister. This symbol, by the way, is called the tilde, and you can find it on your keyboard right above the tab key to the left of the number 1. So again, this is going to target those paragraphs that are siblings of a div, and they of course need to share the same parent, right? That's what being a sibling means. You have the same parent. So let's take a look at an example. Here I have jQuery tutorial 11 open. Make sure you have the right project open. And the index.html page. This is actually still very similar to the previous lesson. Let's say we wanted to get the sibling divs of the unordered list steps. So this is the unordered list steps. It starts from here and goes all the way up to here. So to this particular unordered list, we want to get the div siblings. Well, that's going to be this div as well as this div. These are the siblings of the unordered list with the ID steps. So let's target that. I'm going to open up the jQuery custom code file, and I already have the document.ready function that we looked at in the previous lesson. So let's target that unordered list, and it has the ID steps, and then we put the tilde and then we give the div, and let's just highlight it with a border like we were doing in the previous lesson. So let's refresh the page here and notice that both of these divs are siblings of this unordered list. But let's say you want to only target a specific sibling, right? You don't want all the brothers or sisters, but you want to select a specific sibling. In this example, we're targeting all of the div siblings to the unordered list, right? But let's say we wanted to target a specific div. For that, we could do something like this. The plus sign is used to target immediately adjacent elements, okay? So applying this in our example, let's go back. So instead of this tilde, all we have to do is put a plus sign. And this is going to target the immediately adjacent div to the unordered list. And looking at our index page, I expect this div right here to be targeted. So let's refresh the page and notice that only this div is being targeted. This is the one that's immediately adjacent to the unordered list that we have up here. And that's what that plus sign allows us to do. It gives us the immediately adjacent sibling. Now some of the syntax that I'm going over, you're just going to sort of have to memorize it as you go along or practice it on your own, but these are CSS concepts, so I expect you to somewhat already be familiar with that. That's a prerequisite for this course, but I'm going through it in detail here so you can see how it's applied in jQuery. And for those of you that are not familiar with CSS, this will be a great review, so definitely make sure you're practicing. You know, we have projects in the course, so make sure you're completing those projects. I test you on all of these concepts. Otherwise, it will be much harder to retain all of this information. Now moving on, let's talk about not equal to. Let's say we want to target those elements that have a particular attribute that is not equal to a particular value. To achieve that, we use something called a not equals operator. And that looks like this. And we can use this when we are trying to check whether a particular attribute does not contain a given value. In the previous lesson, you saw that we could target those elements that have an attribute with a given value. For example, in this case, we are searching for those paragraphs that have the class attribute with the value instruct title. Okay? But let's say we wanted to get everything but this. How would we target that? Well, we could use the not equals operator, and that just means adding an exclamation point right before the equal sign, like this. And this is going to make this is going to target all of those paragraphs that have a class value that is not equal to instruct title. Okay, so looking back here in the index page, this is a paragraph that has the instruct title class. So this is the one that is not going to be targeted. And the rest of the paragraphs here, we have one here, and I think we have another one down here. These are going to be targeted. So let's try that code. So we could do p, and then we give the class attribute not equal to instruct title. And it's going to highlight in red all of those paragraphs that are not with the class instruct title. So let's refresh the page here and notice that it's going to target both of these guys. This one, in case of flat tire, is the one with the class instruct title, and it did not target that one. Okay? So that's the not equal to operator that you want to keep in mind. Now let's say you wanted to target those elements that have a particular attribute that starts with a given word or a series of letters. So for example, if you wanted to get all of those elements that have the class attribute that starts with IMP. So we know we have some classes here called important, and it's going to target all of these important classes. All we have to do is give the IMP. So the way we need to do that is inside of the brackets, we give the class, and then we use something called this caret equal to. Okay, the caret equal to means starts with. So we want to get all of those elements on the page that have a class that starts with these characters. So we know that it's going to be this list item, and this list item down here. So let's refresh the page and notice that it's targeting exactly those elements. Now just like we have a starts with, naturally there's also something called ends with. and that is just a $sign. So in this example, we're using a caret. Just change that to a $sign. And this is going to target all of those elements that have a class attribute that ends with these characters. Now we know that there's no elements on the page that have class attribute that ends with these characters, and I can confirm that. Let's refresh the page and notice nothing is highlighted here. So let's pick something off of this page. Let's choose steps. Those elements that have the ID that ends with the word steps. So we could just change this to steps and make sure instead of class we need an ID, because both of these, this particular unordered list is an ID with steps, and this unordered list is an ID with nested steps. So this is going to target both of those unordered lists. So let's refresh the page, and boom, there you go. Notice it's targeting the outside list and then the inside nested list. Both of them end with the word steps. Now there are some other things, for example, checking for whether an attribute contains a specific word. Back here in our index.html page, we have this div with the ID closing statement. So we could target this by using the tilde equals. And this searches for the ID containing this entire word. So let's refresh the page here. And boom, notice that this is the element that had the ID called closing statement, and that's what we targeted. Now you might be wondering, let's say if we change this closing to just CLOS, just like that, would it still target that ID? Well, let's refresh the page and notice that it no longer targets that. So the entire word needs to be inside of this. So not just closing, but we need to put the entire word called closing underscore statement. That's the value of this ID. So this is basically a value check. This is very similar to doing something like, equals, except for if there are multiple classes, you can search for a specific class by using this tilde equals. Now to search for only a subset or a substring of these characters, instead of this tilde, we used something called an asterisk. So an asterisk equals is going to match any sequence of characters that are contained within the given attribute. So let me just get rid of the CL and let me get rid of everything else here. So OSING is going to be searched in all of the elements that have the ID. So we know that that's only this ID. I don't think anything else has those characters. So let's now refresh the page and notice that it is in fact targeting that correctly. Alright, so just a subtle difference, this asterisk compared with the tilde. Tilde is the entire word being contained, and the asterisk is a sequence of characters. And it could be any set of characters. As long as those characters appear in the value of ID, it's going to pull that up. Now in the previous lesson I told you about filters, such as the colon first and colon last, as well as the nth child, and so on. There are some other filters to learn about, and we're going to go over a few in the remainder of this lesson and then continue on the remaining filters in the next lesson. Let's say we wanted to target all of the divs that contain a paragraph. So for that we could just do div colon has. Alright, this is a filter. To the argument of this filter we pass in the particular tag that we are interested in. So this is going to target all of those divs that have the P tag. Now let's refresh the page, and that happens to be this guy. Well, let's just make sure that it is targeting the expected value. The div that contains a P. Let's go to our index.html. Is there any div on this page? Yes, it is. We have this div up here. The second div does not contain a paragraph. So we just have two divs, only one of them contain a paragraph, and that's the thing that's being targeted. So this is basically checking for whether the div contains a child of paragraph, and it's targeting that entire div. Notice that the line is not surrounding just this guy, it's surrounding the entire div. If we have other paragraphs in there, let me just copy this and paste it. it's not individually targeting each one of these paragraphs. It's targeting the entire div, because that's what this does. We're saying, whether this div has a P, and it's going to target that particular div. So let's refresh the page and notice that it's targeting the entire div. It doesn't matter if it contains anything else. Let's say inside of this div we have these H2s. Instead of P's we have H2s, like that. Let's refresh the page. It's still targeting this entire div because it contains a P. So very important to keep in mind, it's not targeting the specific paragraphs or the specific elements. In this case, this is a filter, and it's saying give me all the divs that have a paragraph. Let's say we want to target all of the H1s, H2s, H3s on the page. There's a filter called header. All right, and this is going to target all of the headers on the page. So let's refresh the page and notice that this is, I believe, an H3 or something, and these are H2s. So it's targeting all of the headers on the page. This is a header filter. Now let's say that I want to search for those divs that have a header inside of them. For that, it would be as simple as just putting a div and then using the has filter, and then in the argument of the filter we're passing in the header filter, like that. So what's going inside of this has is a selector. This is a selector, isn't it? So we're passing in this selector into the argument of has, and we're saying, hey, give me all the divs that have a header. And this will target, I believe there's only one div down here. It's going to target this guy. This is the only div that contains a H5 header. So let's refresh the page. And notice it's targeting that exact div, because that div does have a header. Now there's one more filter before we end this lesson that is important for you to know, and that is the not filter. The not filter basically negates anything that is inside of the selector. So we pass in a selector into the not filter, right? That's an argument that we're passing into the not filter, and whatever's in here is going to be negated. So let's say that I want all of the LIs that are not with the class important. Okay, so that's all of these other LIs, right? I want to target these, but I don't want to target the ones that have a class being important. They could have other classes, but we cannot have LIs with the class important being targeted. For that, we can use the not filter. And the way that's going to work is, let me just comment this line out here. We need to first target the LIs, and then we use :not. And then as an argument to that, we pass in a selector. Into the not, we pass in a selector, and that's going to be the important class. Notice I'm using a dot here to represent the class, of course. And then we can just give it the CSS to highlight as we've been doing, just so we can see how it looks on the screen. Okay, so let's load the page, refresh, and boom. Notice that all of those LIs that were not with the class important are targeted. All right, park vehicle safely. This does have the important class. So does this one, right? This also has a class .important, and so does this one. The rest of these LIs do not have the class important. So that's what this not operator does. It negates whatever is inside of here. We are targeting the .important, but then we're saying not. So it's going to pick the LIs that do not have the class important. So let me ask you a pop quiz question. How would you target those divs that do not have a header? Take a moment, pause the video, try this out on your own. I want you to target those divs that do not have a header. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you took a stab at that. That may have been a little challenging, but it's not too bad. Let me show you how that's going to be done. Let me get rid of this line here. We don't need that anymore. And I'm just going to use some of the code that we have here. So I want to get all of those divs that do not have a header. You may have thought of just putting a not like that. Div : not, and then inside we pass in the header, but this is not going to work. And the reason for why this is not going to work is because we're saying where div does not contain or is not rather header, right? We don't have a div that is a header. We have divs that are divs, right? We don't have divs that are headers. So we need to be more explicit. And inside of this not filter, we need to pass in has filter. And then passing in the has, we have to pass in the header. So now if you read it from inside out, we're first targeting has header. So it's going to target all of those elements, and then it has the not. So it does not have header. And then those divs that do not have header. All right, so this has filter is important. So let's refresh the page here. There you go. This is the div that does not have a header. This one does, so it didn't target that. Hey there, welcome to this lesson. For the past several lessons, we've been beating on the topic of how to target the various elements of the DOM by using CSS selectors. In this lesson, we'll learn about a very powerful topic called traversing. And traversing is basically selectors on steroids. Okay, that's how you can think of it. You still select an element by the ID or class attribute as you've seen, but after that you can add what is called a traversal method. Okay, you can tag that method onto the selector. And this allows you to move up and down or in and out of the DOM of the different DOM elements. And this provides a tremendous amount of flexibility so that you can navigate around the DOM as you please. So let's go over our first example of traversal. But before that, make sure you have the correct project open. This is jQuery tutorial 12, and I have the index.html page open here. So in this index.html, we have a couple of unordered lists. This is the full unordered list, the outer unordered list, and its ID is courses. And inside of here, we have further breakdown in the mathematics department. We have algebra, geometry, and calculus. Okay, and this is the ID for this sub unordered list. Okay, this nested unordered list, math subjects. And then similarly for sciences, we also have an unordered list called science underscore subjects. That's the ID. And then we have geology, physics, chemistry. World history is part of the outside list. So browse around here, understand how this page is structured. This is simple, straightforward HTML. Let's load this page up in the browser. I'm going to right click here and go to show in Finder so that I can open the folder, and just double click on this page. That will open up the web page in our browser. So turn your attention to how this is structured. If I wanted to find all of the list items on this page, I could just use a typical selector. Let me open up the console that we talked about a couple of lessons ago. I think it was lesson 4 where I introduced you to the developer console. So just navigate here on this sideway ellipsis, click there, go to more tools, and then click on developer tools, and that will open up the developer tools for you. And navigate over to the console tab. The elements tab shows the DOM, and you can navigate over to the different elements here, but we want the console. And in here you could just type the jQuery that you need to target the different elements. So if I wanted to target all of the LIs on the page, I could just use this selector, hit enter, and notice that it'll show all of the LIs. Let's expand this a bit, and then hover your mouse here. Notice that it's targeting all of the LIs on the page. So mathematics is an LI, and inside of this LI we have an unordered list, which is these guys right here. Okay, and then further we have sciences and then geology. So it's basically getting all of the LIs on the page. So you already know how to do selectors. If I want for example, the math subjects, that's this guy right here. If I wanted to get the list items inside of math subjects ID, that's going to be these math subjects. So I could just put a space here and type in LI, and that will give me the 3 LIs that are inside of math subjects. But there is actually a better way to do this, a faster way. It's faster for your browser to run something along the lines of .find. Okay, this is our first traversal method, find. So what this does is gives all of the descendants that are of this type inside of math subjects. Okay, so all of the list items that are inside of math subjects, that's what this find is going to target. Hit run and notice, or press enter and notice that our list is shown down here, and check out the different elements. It's important to note that the find method gets all of the descendants, not just direct children, but all of the descendants. So for example, if I was to change math subjects to courses, which is the outer ID, the outer list, which wraps this entire list, if I do .find li, that's going to give me all of the li's on the page. Expand this and you know, hover your mouse here and you'll notice that it goes into the list items and the nested list items and targets all of those li's as well. Okay, so find is basically a descendants searcher. If you want to search for specific descendants, you could do .find and it'll get all of the descendants. Well, let's say you only want to see the children of courses. Now, by the way, I'm pressing my up and down arrow key to toggle over the different items that we've already typed. So I just pressed the up key and it brought my last statement. Instead of courses.find, I could do courses.children. Okay, and this is going to give me the direct descendants. Let's execute that and notice the li's here. That's the first li, second li, third li, right? And then it moves on to the fourth li down here, which is sciences, and then the fifth one down here, world history. It did not go into the grandchildren, the nested li. It did not go there. It's just sticking with the direct children of courses. So that's what this children method allows. Press on this clear console button and that will clear the screen. Now you can chain on these different traversal methods to get to the desired destination. For example, if I wanted to get all of the children of any li inside of courses, I could do something like this. So this will get us all the li's that are inside of courses, all the direct descendant li's of courses. I could do .children again. And this time I won't specify any specific kind of tag. It's just going to give me all of the children that belong in the li's. So execute that and notice that it's able to target the unordered lists that belong in the li's. Okay, so it gave me the children for mathematics, which is the unordered list with the ID math subjects, and it gave me the unordered list for sciences, which is the ID science underscore subjects. So we tagged on an extra children method. We are chaining these methods together. Inside of courses we have li's, and some of these li's have children, and that's why we can execute .children on that. Now if I was to put another .children here, so we want the children of the children of the children, this is going to return the nested list items, all right, inside of each one of those children's. So under math subjects we have these three li's, and then under sciences, science subject ID, we have these three li's. Okay, so you can chain these methods around and navigate your way around the DOM. And for this type of work, the console is very, very handy. Now you've seen the first filter and the last filter. We talked about that a couple of lessons ago. Well, there are methods for those in traversal. If I wanted to get the first child of one of these li's, in courses we have li's, and its children is going to give us those two unordered lists. Now I could just do .first, and that will give me the unordered list with the ID math subjects. Let's test that out. Let's run that and notice that it gives me exactly that. Instead of first, I could do last, and that will give me the second unordered list. We're running out of space here. Let me clear the console again, and then we can run our last statement. Now this last method gets the second of the two children for the li's that belong in courses. Now let's say we wanted to get the parent of a particular child. So instead of .last, let's run this again to see what that gives us. This gives us the two unordered lists. If I do .parent, this should give us the li, the two parents in which both of these unordered lists reside, and that should be two li's. Run that and notice that we have two li's. Let's expand this. This is the first li, the container for mathematics, and then this is the second li, the container for sciences. So that's what parent gives us. Now this gives, by the way, the immediate parent for the given element. If I do .parents like that, this is going to give me ancestors. It's going to give me parents as well as ancestors, all the way up to the the first body or HTML tag. So let's run that and boom, notice that we get the 2 LIs, but we also get the courses in which all of these list items are in, and then we get the body and as well as the HTML, which is the entire doc. So one of them is a parent, which gets the direct parent of the given child, and parents with an S plural, that gives us all of the ancestors. Inside of courses, we have LI, and let's say I want to get the first LI, so I could do first. That's going to give me the LI that is, the first LI of this courses unordered list. I could do something called walking the DOM. So after first, I could do .next, like that. And this will give me the second LI. Let's expand that and hover your mouse here. Notice it moved on to psychology. I could do .next again. And this will give me the third LI. Expand this, hover your mouse here. Notice it's going into the mathematics LI. So it moved from the first to the next, and then the next, and so on. This is called walking the DOM. Let me clear the screen here so that we have space to play around with. Now, if I wanted to go back one step, right, we are advancing forward. We're basically walking the DOM forward. We could walk the DOM backward by doing .prev, which stands for previous. So instead of this mathematics LI, it's going to go back to psychology when I execute with this .prev. So let's run that, expand this LI, and hover your mouse here. Notice it moved to psychology. Before we wrap up this lesson, I want to go over one more traversal method, and I've cleared the screen here so that we can start fresh with this particular example. So let's target the courses ID again, and let's say we want the children that are LI inside of courses, and then we want to get those LIs that have children inside of them. So up to this point, this targets all of the top level direct children, and then if I do another .children, that's going to target these two guys, these two children right here, the nested unordered lists inside of these mathematics and sciences LI. So then if I do another children here, that's going to target the individual LI elements inside of this unordered list that is yet inside of this LI. So now we're at this level here, right here, algebra, geometry, calculus, geology, physics, chemistry. We are in this nested list items inside of the unordered list that is inside of this list. So we're at that level here. And just to visualize that here on the screen, let me put a border around it. 1px solid, let's give it the color red. So we are talking about these inner list items, okay? And if I wanted to target the first LI of each one of these nested lists, I could just do at the .children, I could just add another .first .css, and to identify the difference, let's just make this one green. And now notice that this is being targeted and we colored it green. So let me refresh the screen here so that we can get rid of all of the markup on the page. And let me clear the page here, bring back the last statement. So this is what we're talking about. We've targeted this using this traversing functionality. But let's say for this element, I wanted to get the closest parent. How would I do that? Well, there's a method called .closest. So I could just add that after first. I could just do closest. And as an argument to this closest method, let's give the UL, because this LI is contained within a UL unordered list. So what this is going to do is going to go up the DOM and get the closest unordered list in which this LI algebra belongs in. So let's color that red so that we can differentiate, and then hit enter and notice that it targeted this math subjects. This is the UL, the unordered list that is containing this algebra LI. So this closest is a handy method that you can use, and it returns 1 or 0 elements, okay, as opposed to, for example, parents. The parents is going to return all of the parents. So if I change this to parents, notice it's going to target the outer unordered list as well. Basically all of the parents. It's targeting the math subjects as well as courses, which is a container for both of these nested unordered lists. So parents gets all of the ancestors with this tag, and closest gets the closest ancestor If it doesn't exist, it doesn't return anything. It's either 0 or 1 element is returned using closest. You might be wondering that closest is very similar to the parent method. Let's refresh the screen here, and I'm going to clear the screen. So we just targeted the parents of the UL. We have two options. We could do either closest, or we could do dot parent, and they do almost the same thing. So when I run this, it's going to target the unordered list called math subjects. Okay, and the same thing happens when I do closest. All right, nothing changed here. It's still targeting math subjects for both parent and closest. So the real difference here is that closest basically starts at the current element, whereas parent starts at the parent level. A subtle difference there. Closest begins with the current element and travels up the DOM tree until it finds a match for the supplied selector, and the returned jQuery object that will contain 0 or 1 elements. But the parent selects one element above, and the parents method with the S plural, the parents method is similar to parent but selects all the matching elements up the DOM tree. So oftentimes you can interchange both dot parent and dot closest depending on what you're trying to do, but I always recommend to use closest if you're trying to get the closest parent of a given element. Alright, so try these methods out in your browser. Experiment with them. These are very handy traversal methods that you'll be using plenty in your jQuery career. We spoke about dot children, dot parent, parents, first, last, closest. We talked about the find. So play around with these until you feel comfortable before moving on to the next lesson. I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.